Hey there everyone, welcome back to another look between the lines. Today we have a pretty special topic to be going over because, as you know, we have covered what's going on in the world, what's going on in the news, and how all of this impacts our lives from a different perspective, or trying to have a different perspective. But what we've never really gotten into is what this channel means and what looking in between the lines means to us. Anywhere you go online, you can find a place to find the information you're looking for, even if that information isn't accurate, and that goes on either side of a political spectrum, or basically any thought philosophy from religion, politics, style of living, health, how to raise your children, what to think, what to do with jobs, and basically how to live your life and how to think as you're doing so. And that's why it's really important to take a step back and ask yourself why. And so, we want to talk about what our plan is with this channel and what the goal is of getting this all together. So thank you all for watching and listening in. Now let's get into this. Here in the United States, just to go back a little bit of time, we've always been an opinionated people. Everything about the United States has been about forming opinions or making other people's change their opinions in ways that's a bit unorthodox compared to not only other parts of the world, but other parts of human history. And that's what's made it such an interesting social and cultural experience. Because of how our voting system works and how our electorate works, you don't just have an opinion. Your voice is literally power. Power to shape the government, power to shape the world. And whether you believe in the system or not, it's created a large divide of people that do have beliefs that are often contradictory and opposing. For the past 300 years, your voice could have a purpose even if it's not the same as someone else's, even if it doesn't line with your neighbors, your family, or even your own government leaders. Human history has been filled with tyranny, despots, and tragedy, and that's something that's interesting to look at what's going on in the world today and seeing why it's happening. We've covered the impact of social media. We've talked about the election and what's going on with claims of fraud, because it's gotten to a point where opinions aren't just so different that it's getting to the boiling point. Here in 2020, opinions are so different that you are either on one side or you are ideologically opposed to understanding the other side. The grass isn't just greener on your side, there is no grass on the other side. And why is that? Why do people think like that? And that is what here at Between the Lines, we're aiming to try and bridge that gap between all the other information that's available at your fingertips. With the click of a button, you can find out about conspiracy theories on a government scale. And with the ease of access of this information, there's an obfuscation on what the truth really is, and usually it's somewhere in the middle between everything you can find. Now, this isn't to say that a lot of information isn't factually true. On the contrary, there's actually quite a few news stations on not just the mainstream media, but with third parties that will cover things that they're backing up with research, as well as breakdowns of what that research means to them, and as well as what it might mean to others. And to take this analysis a little bit further, research is a concept that we're taught in school, and so the more educated a person becomes, the more they're going to lean on academia or public sources of information that are backed by those types of sources. There's often the argument that the more educated you become, the more liberal you become, or at least more left-leaning when it comes to politics, and there's a little bit of truth to that, because the more you learn to research, the more you're going to get past just the surface level of information, and the more you're going to try and break down what things mean and how it's going to impact more than just one person's perspective. But not everyone can have that education, and not everyone will have that. Everyone's path is going to be different, and there's a lot of debates about that, and we can cover that in a different video, but right now we want to talk about the implications that that has in the world after it's all set in place. Someone who's born into a farming family will never be able to understand someone who's gone on to get a PhD in the social sciences, and that's completely okay. But instead of seeking understanding, too many times do people use differences of opinion or differences in general as an excuse to shun, judge, and categorize, which we covered in our social media video. A lot of this is because social media has catered to this, as well as news. You can look up the same topic and it will be different if you find it on CNN as opposed to Fox. It will be different if you go into a pro-Trump quora versus an anti-Trump or never-Trump quora. If you can put all the information aside, all the logic and all the facts and research, one thing will still be true, and that's that people will not be able to see eye to eye when it comes to these types of things. Social media is filled with echo chambers and astroturfing of misinformation that's trying to guide people into their corner chambers and making sure that they don't leave it. And that leads to some interesting results when you have people leaving those echo chambers. For example, there was an ex-reporter from Fox recently that talked about why Trump supporters are so dedicated and rabid. And she likened it to a drug, and they were drug addicts because they needed that emotional high from watching him and liking his message, regardless of what that message was. There was no thought beyond that. And on the other side, you have the other mainstream media giant, CNN, and its counterparts that would talk about Trump as if he was the most incompetent human being alive. And yes, we do have our own opinions about that because Trump has made a lot of mistakes, and there's been a lot of bad decisions over the last 4 years, and how he talks really can rub people the wrong way. But to take such an absolute stance, it really helps to take a step back and make sure that you can at least have your research, opinions, and understand what the other side's views of research and opinions are. As long as there is human free will, there will be the free will to disagree and even to oppose each other. And there's one fact about human conflict: there is profit to be made from it. Trump was able to rise to presidency not by speaking of unity, not by speaking of solutions, but by talking about taking care of his own people, of his own supporters, and that created such a huge divide of us versus them that's created such a stigma, such a disenfranchised view that basically makes it impossible to relate with some others. And when people feel isolated, they're going to back the ones that support them. And of course, with mainstream media focusing entirely on Trump and his antics, the ones that supported him aren't really going to reflect and see that there's a problem. They're going to double down and feel attacked and want to throw monetary support and pour all of their attention and focus into those sources. With targeted advertising and paid political campaigns and support and lobbying that's all revolving around money and getting support through money, that's why this is so important to notice. Trump coined a phrase called fake news, which is really ironic if you look at everything that's been tweeted and everything that's been talked about over the last 4 years. If you can detract from other people's legitimacy of information or opinions, then you don't have to justify your own. That's why it's so interesting to see such a stark difference between what the Obama administration left behind in its legendary legacy, as well as what the Biden administration is looking to do by continuing that, promising unity, promising healing, and promising trying to use the education, understanding, and empathy that he and his team has in order to unify the country in a way that historically over the past 300 years has been impossible. And while it may be wishful thinking, trying to fix this and trying to set up a prosperous future is going to set a new standard that hopefully the next generations will be able to live by. Hopefully we won't be as plagued by our divisive culture or the differences of them, but we'll be able to look and understand each other without it being an us versus them. I need to emphasize this. That doesn't mean that only one side needs to change. There are some ideological differences that go beyond education and upbringing. Some of it are differences that really need to be rectified on a cultural and individual level. We need to get past to where people can look at a woman and assume what to do with her body, or to assume what she needs to think about politics and otherwise because you know best. Too many times that's been thrown around all over the news, and especially from the presidential office over the past few years. But President Trump isn't solely to blame. While he has been a lot of gasoline added to that fire is one that has been desperately tried to be put out by those who are seeking change. And change goes both ways. It can be good or bad. We've seen horrible tragedies in history as people have rallied up against the wrong kinds of change. But just like with President Trump and everything that he's promised to do, it's important to step up and make your voice heard against it. I can't repeat this enough. The power to vote is something that should not be underestimated. When voices unify, things happen, and it is very important that your voice becomes part of the change that you want. But it's also important to understand the power that goes behind that. Guns are a touchy subject, but they're an important piece to relate to this because you cannot carry around a gun without a license. While that may not be enough, requiring the step of getting a license at least requires the individual to look into the importance of safety and what they should be doing to keep themselves and others safe, because a gun is powerful. Voting has its own power and responsibility, and that power and responsibility comes from the information that you need to look into. You need to know what you're voting for. You need to know what the government can be, because with the government is the military, and with the military has the power to change the entire world. That's why you really have to notice the beginnings of fascism, of tyranny, and other things that we need to avoid. We need to focus on progression and getting to a better point, but that comes from information. Here at Between the Lines, you're going to hear me say let's look into why, and you should too. Always be willing to question things. Always be willing to take a step back and think, what's that going to mean? What will that mean for your children? What will that mean for your neighbors? And what will that mean for you? If a tax plan is going to mean less money in your pocket, where's that money going to go? What programs are promised to be implemented? And what is that going to do for your neighbors, for your children, and most importantly for you when all of that comes together? And even if you aren't really interested in that, which a lot of people clearly aren't, if you look at the voting habits of today, it's important to at least try and do your part. But we'd love to hear what you think about this. Post in the comments. Let us know what you think about what it means to vote, what it means to question the news, and what it means to kind of ask the question why. What is your revelations that you've come across as you've been more educated, or as you've talked with people, or just had your own experiences? We'd love to know. And of course, please don't forget to hit that like button. Really helps out the channel grow and supports the YouTube algorithm. And hit that subscribe button so you know when we come out with more content. So again, thank you all for joining, and we'll see you next time for another look between the lines. Take care.